Hi, welcome to the Thames River Basin Partnership Fall 2023 meeting. This month, we are pleased to be able to introduce Katie Lund, who's the Coastal Training Coordinator for the Connecticut National Estuarine Research Reserve, and she's going to explain what it is and how we all fit into it. So welcome, Katie.
Thanks, Jean. I appreciate you having me for this brief overview of our reserve, and happy to answer any questions as we go because, I want it to be informal. It's a small group, obviously, and I think that some of you may have heard about us already, but for those of you that haven't, our reserve was established in 2022. We are actually part of a national system. It's under NOAA, all of our National Estuarine Research Reserves. There are 30 of them in the country. We are the newest, and we are the 30th. There are a couple that will be designated in the next few years, but ours is the last one, at least on the East Coast, to be designated within this NOAA national system. Our reserve, like all reserves, also has a state partner, and the state partner through which the program is administered is through the University of Connecticut. So I am at the University of Connecticut's Avery Point campus at the mouth of the Thames River. And I can tell you a little bit more about our reserve within that kind of Thames River setting as I go here. But just in general, what is a research reserve? As I said, NOAA is that kind of framework by which we operate, and all 30 reserves provide special protected coastal places for basically 4 areas, and I'll describe these in a little more detail as I go as well. Research, monitoring, education, and stewardship. Those are the core focus areas of every reserve. We conduct work that's locally relevant, but also nationally significant. So we try and bring some of the national approach and resources and learning from some of these other reserves here to Connecticut, and address these kinds of coastal issues through our multidisciplinary staff, but also through partnerships with organizations like all of yours that are involved in the Thames River partnership. So, and we do try and tailor some of those national programs, as I said, to our priority coastal local management issues. The vision is probably very similar to many organizations that you work with, if not your own, to create a resilient, healthy Long Island Sound estuary and watershed where human and natural communities thrive. And our mission really is to integrate science-based decision-making with conservation and learning and recreation and economic viability of the areas here in Southeast Connecticut. Our boundary on this slide shows us going from the west, from the Connecticut River through the area where you're all focused and located on the Thames River, and further east to Bluff Point State Park and Haley Farm is kind of the furthest most east land-based area of our reserve. We have 52,000 acres. Over 50,000 of those acres are water. So you can see the boundary of the reserve goes fairly far offshore toward the New York line. A few slides to highlight some of the significant areas in our reserve, starting on the west. As I said, the Connecticut River, at the mouth of the Connecticut River, is where DEEP's Marine District headquarters is. We partner very closely with DEEP, and they were very much involved in the designation process. Our new reserve manager, Kevin O'Brien, used to work for DEEP, so that's a way for us to kind of build those relationships and start with a really great foundation for those, working on different projects together and bringing their expertise to some of our work. At the mouth of the river is the Roger Torrey Peterson Natural Area Preserve, and we are thinking about using that area to establish some salt marsh monitoring reference sites. And as well as this area on the Connecticut River, Lord Cove Natural Area Preserve provides the reserve kind of more of a natural-based focus and sites for ecological research, for stewardship. And, these are, for the most part, the difference between the west and the east part of our reserve is that these areas are much less used in terms of public use and recreation. So they're a little bit less disturbed for some of that science and research and stewardship activities to be taking place. As we go further east, we have Bluff Point State Park and Haley Farm State Park, as I mentioned, in our Avery Point campus, which are areas that are more used by the public. So this is where our headquarters is located. You can see obviously the Thames River in the background. And Bluff Point State Park is one of the most populated or most used, not populated, but most used state parks in the state. So it gives us a way to bring some of the programming that we do to the public who uses Bluff Point. And we're thinking about ways to use this area for different sites that we could have demonstration or pilot projects for restoration or invasive species removal. Looking over toward Mumford Cove, we're thinking about ways to do different types of eelgrass monitoring or kind of pilot projects where we could investigate where aquaculture and eelgrass could potentially be integrated in a way that has mutual benefits, and use these parts of our reserve, which are more heavily used at this point, to do some different types of pilot projects like that. And then furthest most east, we have Haley Farm State Park, which again gets a lot of public use, and so doing some even education programs or training programs here at these sites is what we hope to do in the future. So in addition to that boundary, which is very much coastal focused, we have what's called a targeted watershed area. So the entirety of at least the focus of kind of that programming that we can bring to communities along the Thames River and portions of the Connecticut River, we can go further inland to a broader targeted watershed. We don't just have to focus our programs that I'll describe in a minute on those coastal communities. We can go inland as well. So as I mentioned earlier, research and monitoring, stewardship, education, and coastal training are the pillars for every reserve system. Just to give you a slide for each of those to describe a little bit more detail what we're thinking here since the designation and kind of moving into the future. The objectives of our research and monitoring program, which are being led by Jamie Baudry, who is a professor in the Marine Sciences Department here at Avery Point, and she was very involved in the designation process. So she's been establishing the focus of this research program for several years now. But basically, one of the main objectives is to support and conduct basic and applied research within the reserve and really look at status and trends and forecast some of the environmental quality. An example is that Jamie and her research assistant are investigating where they will establish their system-wide monitoring program, or the acronym is SWAMP, which is kind of an unfortunate acronym, but the system-wide monitoring program focuses on establishing water quality monitoring stations, and every reserve does this and establishes kind of a long-term monitoring approach where our data can be compared to other reserves in the country and be used along with local organizations to monitor kind of water quality health. They're looking right now at places where these will be established. And I think things like Ram Island, Mumford Cove, Fort Trumbull, places where we have access to different state piers or state owned land where we can establish these kinds of monitoring equipment is being looked at. And they're going to be having a series of stakeholder meetings in early next year to, hear from organizations like yourself about where these kinds of monitoring stations would be really beneficial. The research program, like the other parts of our reserve staff, we really are trying to encourage this kind of partnership building and multi-agency approach to bring, in this case, the scientific and technical information from the reserve system to different audiences. The stewardship program is conducting site assessments to kind of inventory and understand some of the things that are issues in our reserve, as well as other places where we can, again, use it as pilot project case studies to understand through these assessments, you know, how the invasive species, as an example, are distributed at Bluff Point State Park. So they, Jason Krumholtz is our stewardship coordinator, took out students who are working with us. We had 12 students this summer, and did a pretty comprehensive assessment of the invasive species at Bluff Point State Park. And they're going to be doing that at other reserve properties. So that's one example of what they're doing for site assessment. You know, Jason is really trying to build that partnership with Connecticut Deep, because they own some of these state properties within our reserve boundary, and figure out how we can kind of do things like restoration projects, salt marsh restoration, eelgrass restoration, living shoreline kinds of work, in partnership with Connecticut Deep. And, you know, he's really trying to also bring his work across the other sectors of our reserve. So my training programs could potentially have a focus on some of the work that our stewardship is doing. So, you know, how to teach people how to implement different types of living shoreline approaches could be one thing that Jason and I partner and bring to some of our audiences. Larissa Graham is our education coordinator. If some of you haven't seen a message from Larissa yet, you probably will soon. Her focus is on providing experiential place-based learning opportunities to students K through 12, educators, teachers, kind of on the estuary, or what she calls the TOTE program, that all reserves actually administer through the education sector. And, you know, bring these kind of place-based learning to those audiences. That's her mission through her education program. And, you know, also building the kind of educational mission to a variety of different sectors, businesses, municipalities, the public. She had unfortunately scheduled our first reserve celebration day a couple weekends ago, and it turned out to be a really awful, rainy, gray day at Bluff Point State Park, and so it had to be postponed. But that was to really deliver some programming and things like, you know, fishing and boating and invasive species walks and geologic history kind of walks to a broader public audience too. So she doesn't just focus on that student educator population, but does bring some of the reserves programming to a broader public audience. And then finally, my coastal training program is again bringing education to audiences that are a little different from Larissa's. I think they're falling under the umbrella of what we refer to as coastal decision makers. And so that can be everyone from municipal staff to NGOs to consultants, state agency staff. So we really try and build capacity and support through our programs, coastal training program, to those kinds of audiences. And we do that by networking and partnering and information sharing. So, you know, we might not be the experts here at our reserve on the topics that we're doing trainings about, but we're the convener for the people who might have that kind of information, that we can help facilitate the conversations and bring information to different audiences. And a couple examples of the training program at the bottom of the slide. We're working with Connecticut Deep and some of their staff in the Office of Climate Planning, who have received a NIFWF grant, and they're thinking about how to deliver living shoreline information through a workshop series. So we'll be involved in some of that kind of capacity building. Could be, again, audiences like consultants who are trying to understand different living shoreline approaches, or researchers who are needing to, you know, think about monitoring how these approaches are actually working or maybe not working along our coast. So that kind of workshop series and that information is an example of our training program. We did have a freshwater invasives 3-day, what we call plant camp, that we held here at Project O on our Avery Point campus, the Project Oceanology building, where we had people from all over New England actually coming to learn about freshwater invasives. We might do the same thing for marine invasives in a couple years. We facilitate, and it just started, a Long Island Sound eelgrass collaborative, which is implementing strategies for management and restoration of eelgrass in Long Island Sound through a collaborative that involves NGOs and agencies and academics. And then finally, outside the top, what I'll call topic specific trainings, which are those examples I just described, we also can bring some of the NOAA capacity to deliver trainings on process types of skills. So for example, facilitation training is the one that I highlight here. We're actually going to be delivering that to municipal staff in early December. And to NGOs, as I put on this slide, on March 28th. So that's quite a ways away, but it'll probably be here before we know it. But basically the focus of this training, and as an example of process training, is this facilitation basics training. This is the slide that we're using to advertise this training to the municipalities on December 5th and 6th. And, the objectives, as are outlined here, are to explore tools for how to better facilitate and design productive meetings, how to develop skills for dealing with disruptive behaviors or kind of contentious issues that might be dealt with in different types of meetings, both public meetings and with staff or other organizations. Sometimes those disruptive behaviors are difficult to deal with when facilitating meetings. And then how to design and plan them to reach the outcomes you're hoping for. So this training is going to be delivered by NOAA virtually in December to municipal staff, and we're partnering with Sustainable CT and the 2 COGs that are part of our reserve boundary. As I mentioned, for NGOs, the same training will be delivered, but it'll actually be in person for 1 day in the end of March. I guess the last thing is we have a lot of this information on our website. So, you can visit the website. You can always, you're welcome. Anyone's welcome to come and visit us here at UConn and the Avery Point campus. If, we can set up a meeting or deliver something more personal as a way to deliver this kind of information to staff for different organizations, we're more than happy to do that too. So I will end with this slide, and people can scan that QR code or take down our reserve website and visit that for more information. And please reach out in the future too if you have questions. But I'm happy to answer questions now if you have any.
I'm going to stop the recording and then we'll do the questions. Thank you very much for this very informative presentation.
That was wonderful. Thank you.